August 1943. The air in Block 11 of Ravensbrück concentration camp hung thick with the stench of unwashed bodies, fear, and the faint metallic tang of blood that never quite washed away. Dawn roll call had barely ended when the unexpected happened. Two female SS guards entered the Polish political prisoners' barracks carrying clipboards instead of whips. They did not shout, they did not strike anyone, they simply walked slowly down the rows of triple-tiered bunks, eyes sharp, lips pursed, like talent scouts at an audition no one had asked to attend. The women froze. In Ravensbrück, silence from the guards was more terrifying than screaming. Under 35. Line up. One of them ordered in clipped German. Her name was Emma Kleist, 22 years old, blonde, pretty in the way the Reich liked its daughters to be pretty. The other was older, harder. They moved with the calm certainty of people who had done this before. Wanda Toska, 20, a former literature student from Warsaw, felt her stomach knot. She had survived a year here by making herself invisible, head down, shoulders rounded, hair matted with dirt. But that morning she had traded a slice of bread for a thimble of water to wash her face. A tiny act of defiance, of humanity. Now she regretted it. The guards stopped in front of her. "Open your mouth," Wanda obeyed. Cold fingers forced her jaw wider. The younger guard tilted Wanda's chin toward the gray light leaking through the high window. Teeth healthy, no cavities, skin clear, hair light brown, almost blonde when clean, a tick in the ledger. Legs. Wanda was made to roll up her striped trousers. The older guard ran a gloved hand down her calf. Clinical, possessive, no scars, good muscle tone. Another tick. She was chosen. 73 other women were chosen that summer for the same reason. They were young, strong, and, in the eyes of the Reich, beautiful. Blonde or light brunette, blue or green or gray eyes, straight posture, clear complexions, symmetrical faces, legs unmarred by previous beatings or frostbite. The same traits plastered on propaganda posters of laughing German farm girls now marked them for something far worse than death. They called themselves Króliczki, the rabbits, because that was what the doctors wrote on their files. Versuchskaninchen, experimental rabbits. The man who ordered it was SS Reichsarzt Dr. Karl Gebhardt, Heinrich Himmler's personal physician and one of the most powerful medical men in the Third Reich. In May 1942, with the Wehrmacht bleeding men on the Eastern Front and sulfonamide drugs growing scarce, Himmler needed proof that the new wonder drugs were ineffective. That way he could stop supplying them to front-line troops and redirect the chemicals to munitions. But scientific proof required controlled experiments, and Gebhardt insisted those experiments be performed on racially valuable tissue, not Jews, not Slavic subhumans, whose biology, he claimed, would skew results, but on women who looked like the idealized Aryans of Nazi fantasy. Their suffering would be pure, their data would be credible. And so, in the sterile operating theater of Ravensbrück's Revier Infirmary, the rabbits began their ordeal. They were taken in groups of 6, stripped, shaved, disinfected with Lysol that burned like acid, then strapped to tables with leather restraints so tight their wrists bled. No anesthesia, that would contaminate the results. A nurse, sometimes Gebhardt himself, sometimes his deputy Dr. Fritz Fischer, or the sadistic Dr. Herta Oberhuser, would make the first incision. They started with the legs, always the legs, a long cut from mid-thigh to just above the knee, skin folded back like opening a letter. Muscle exposed, glistening, then the real work began. In the first series, they rubbed with shavings, ground glass, and live cultures of gas gangrene, Clostridium perfringens, streptococcus, and tetanus into the wound. They packed the incisions with dirt from the camp yard. They sewed the flesh closed again with coarse thread and waited to see how quickly the leg would rot. The screaming was constant. Maria Kabuwa, 21, a courier for the Polish Home Army, remembered the moment the bacteria took hold. It felt like fire ants eating me from the inside. My leg swelled to twice its size. The skin turned black, the smell, God, the smell. They came every day to measure the necrosis with a ruler. They took photographs. They smiled. When sulfonamides were finally administered, days later, deliberately late, the doctors noted whether the drugs slowed the infection. Usually, they did not. The rabbit's beautiful, healthy legs provided the proof Himmler wanted. But the experiments grew more ambitious. In another series, pieces of bone were removed from the shin, living bone, sawed out with a hand tool while the woman watched. The cavity was then packed with aggressive bacteria. In others, entire sections of muscle were excised and foreign materials inserted. Rags, splinters, pieces of uniform cloth. Some had their bones deliberately broken and set at wrong angles to study non-union fractures. Some had their nerves severed to test regeneration. One woman, Króliczka, had both legs operated on 5 times and walked with crutches for the rest of her life. They were not allowed to die. Death invalidated the data. When fever reached lethal levels, they were given blood transfusions, often from other prisoners, or injected with experimental vitamins. When gangrene threatened the torso, the rotting limb was amputated without anesthetic. The rabbits learned to dread survival as much as death. And then there was the lipstick. In the summer of 1943, a new overseer arrived in the Polish bloc, Aufseherin Emma Kleist, the same pretty 22-year-old who had helped select them. She had a peculiar obsession. She believed that any woman still trying to look beautiful was guilty of defiant spirit, a capital offense. She began searching bunks for contraband cosmetics. 6 women were found with tiny stubs of lipstick they had hidden in the lining of their dresses. Lipstick traded for weeks of bread rations, kept as a last shred of femininity, of self. Emma Kleist lined them up in the apelplets at dawn. She made them put the lipstick on in front of the entire camp. Bright, defiant red mouths on skeletal faces. Then she beat them to death with a shovel. It took less than 10 minutes. The other prisoners were forced to watch. When it was over, she wiped the blood from her hands and said, almost gently, "Now no one will be pretty anymore." Of the 74 rabbits selected between July 1942 and August 1943, 86 operations were performed, some women more than once. 5 died directly from the procedures. 6 were shot later when they could no longer walk and became useless. 63 survived the war, many crippled for life. After liberation in April 1945, the rabbits tried to tell the world what had been done to them. But their testimony was met with discomfort, even disbelief. Allied doctors were horrified by the medical details, but uneasy about the emphasis on beauty. Prosecutors at the Nuremberg doctors' trial in 1946-47 focused on male victims and military implications. The fact that the worst experiments had been reserved for women who looked Aryan complicated the narrative of Nazi racial purity. It was easier to bury. Many of the rabbits' files were classified or quietly lost. Herta Oberhuser, the only woman defendant at the doctor's trial, served just 10 years. Fritz Fischer served 6. Karl Gebhardt was hanged, but mostly for experiments on men. The specific crime of turning beauty into a selection criterion was never properly headlined. Wanda Toska published her memoir in 1962. It sold fewer than 1,000 copies. Maria Kabu spoke to Polish school children until her death in 1996, limping to the front of the classroom on legs that never healed straight. Króliczki, who endured 5 operations, became a doctor herself, ironically specializing in rehabilitation. They called themselves the rabbits to the end, not victims, not survivors, rabbits, because someone had to remember what it felt like to be chosen for being beautiful. Strapped down, cut open, photographed, measured, and told your pain was scientifically necessary. In the end, the clearest data the Nazis ever collected was this: beauty offers no protection when monsters decide it makes you the perfect subject. The rabbits carried that truth in their scars for the rest of their lives. And the world, for a very long time, preferred not to look. Years after the war, when the rabbits finally began to speak in public, people kept asking the same bewildered question. Why did they choose the pretty ones? The question itself revealed how completely the world had misunderstood what happened inside Ravensbrück. It was never about desire. It was about ownership of the ideal. Dr. Karl Gebhardt did not see the rabbits as women. He saw them as living proof of his theories. In his private notes discovered decades later in a Munich archive, he wrote with chilling pride, "The Nordic specimens reacted exactly as predicted. Tissue resistance was high, pain threshold remarkable, aesthetic symmetry allowed precise measurement of necrosis spread." Conclusion: sulfonamides ineffective under battlefield conditions. Recommendation accepted by Reichsführer SS. The aesthetic symmetry line appears 4 times in his reports. To him, a beautiful leg was simply a cleaner canvas. The rabbits learned to hate their own bodies. Olga Marcinkiewicz, a 23-year-old teacher from Łódź with waist-length blonde hair, remembered standing in the washroom one morning in 1944, staring at her reflection in a broken shard of mirror. Her once famous legs were crisscrossed with purple scars, swollen, misshapen. She took the shard and sawed off her hair at the scalp. "If they chose me for this," she whispered to the glass, "then I will stop being what they chose." Some tried to disfigure themselves deliberately. They rubbed dirt into healing wounds. They scratched their faces with nails until they bled. One woman, Janina Avaska, burned her own calf with a red-hot spoon stolen from the kitchen block, hoping infection would make her unusable. The doctors simply amputated above the burn and scheduled her for the next series. The cruelty had layers no survivor could ever forget. There was the cruelty of the knife. There was the cruelty of the camera, every operation photographed in color, the rabbits forced to hold still while flashes popped in their eyes. There was the cruelty of the mirror. After each procedure, they were made to look at what had been done to them, from medical observation of psychological response, and then there was the cruelty of the other prisoners. Because beauty had become poison, the rabbits were sometimes shunned even by their own. Women who had escaped selection whispered that the pretty ones had brought it on themselves. They smiled at the guards. Some said they wanted better work. Rumors spread that the rabbits received extra soup, morphine, clean bandages, all lies. In truth, they lay in a separate room called the bunny hutch, screaming through the walls, while the rest of the block tried to sleep. Only a few understood. One was a Slovak Jewish doctor, Alenka Niedermanova, who had been spared the knife because she was already dying of typhus. Every night she dragged herself to the rabbit's room with stolen aspirin dissolved in water. She spooned it between their cracked lips and whispered, "You are not what they say you are. You are not their ideal. You are our sisters." After liberation, the rabbits scattered across a shattered Europe. Some returned to Poland and were imprisoned again, this time by the communists, who called them Western collaborators for having testified in Nuremberg. Some emigrated to Israel, Canada, Australia, carrying their limp with them like a passport stamp no country recognized. In 1970, a young Polish journalist named Anna Bicken tracked down 39 surviving rabbits for an article almost no one wanted to print. When she asked why they still met every year on August 15th, the anniversary of the last operation, Wanda Toska answered simply, "Because someone has to keep the pain alive. If we forget how much it hurt, they win twice." At those meetings, they brought photographs of themselves before the war, laughing girls in university scarves, dancers in white dresses, a bride with flowers in her hair. They laid the pictures on the table next to x-rays of shattered tibias and medical reports stamped Geheim. Then they held hands and sang the song they had invented in the bunny hutch, a soft, slow lullaby in Polish about rabbits who learned to fly. In 1995, 50 years after liberation, the German government finally awarded the surviving rabbits a pension of 800 marks a month, less than a cleaning lady earned. Most refused it. "We didn't suffer so they could buy us off with pocket money," said Maria Kabuwa. Instead, they used the attention to force the opening of Ravensbrück's medical archives. What emerged were thousands of pages no one had wanted to read, color photographs of smiling doctors holding up severed limbs, detailed charts of leg elegance index versus days until septicemia, and one yellowed list titled Versuchsperson mit nordischen Erscheinungsbild. Experimental subjects with Nordic appearance. 74 names. 74 beautiful ghosts. Today, if you walk the grounds of the Ravensbrück Memorial on a winter afternoon, the wind still carries the smell of pine and ash. In the former Revier building, there is a small display case almost no one stops at. Inside are 5 objects: a rusted scalpel found in the ruins, a shard of red lipstick, half melted, unearthed near the Appelplatz, a child's drawing smuggled out in 1944, 74 stick figure rabbits with angel wings, a single blonde braid, cut off in 1944 and kept for 70 years in a matchbox, and a note in fading ink: "We were not beautiful for them. We were beautiful despite them." The rabbits are almost all gone now. The last one, Maria Kabuwa, died in 2018 at the age of 96. At her funeral in Warsaw, a dozen old women arrived on crutches and in wheelchairs. They did not cry. They stood straight as they could and sang the lullaby one last time. Somewhere above them, 74 rabbits finally learned to fly.